Hi, I'm Siddharth Talur, and this is Thinking in Loud. In today's episode, I want to talk about this concept of an atom of work. I first heard this concept when I used to work at Analog Devices. The concept is not specific only to a certain workplace or a certain type of job. In fact, I've seen that even in student projects or any collaborative projects, this concept would be quite useful. So it's basically a mindset thing, how to think about collaborative tasks and how do you define them and follow up to make sure that they progress successfully. So deliverables and tasks are maybe one way of measuring and ensuring that things do happen when they are supposed to happen. You can have timelines associated with tasks, you can have deadlines. But then those are, I think, okay when you are looking at tasks that maybe one individual has to perform by themselves. So maybe those are good metrics to have for measuring if you are on schedule and on track. But anytime you have interactions or interdependencies, you need a better framework. So let me talk about why this concept might be more useful there. So I'm sure everyone has gone through at least some experiences where you have been on the receiving end, or maybe you were responsible for some task and could not deliver, or did not know what was to be delivered or when it was to be delivered, or maybe you were at the receiving end of something like this. So basically, this atom of work idea is something that's designed to avoid such gaps. So it requires you to think about activities not as tasks, but as a loop of coordination. So in this concept, basically every task has two core roles. There is a requester, someone who asks for something to be done, and there is a performer to whom the request is made, and the performer does some task in return. And basically, any collaborative activity you can imagine as a combination of such requester and performer interactions. Sometimes you may be the requester, sometimes you may be the performer, or the roles could kind of interchange in a task depending on how many times you have to go back and forth to get that thing done. So, in most illustrations of how this thing functions, um, there is this task which has to be done that is at the center, and then there are interactions between the requester and performer that revolve around that task. So, in some sense, the diagram looks like an atom, and that's why it's perhaps called an atom of work. And also, if you think about some large activity that has to happen, maybe you could break it down into many such requester performer interactions, many collaborative tasks. So, in that sense, also is like an atom or a building block of the work. So, many of these come together and then the activity happens, right? So, maybe it's a play on words with two different contexts. So, anyway, there's this task that has to be done that's at the center of this. And the requester basically comes with a request or an offer. So let's maybe stick with the definition limited to request. So someone needs something done, they come with a request to the performer, and the performer makes a promise of what they would deliver. So as you can imagine, here a lot of breakdowns can happen if the expectations are not met properly. Maybe the requester has something in mind, but the performer does not understand the request correctly, or the performer makes a promise, but then the requester does not understand that correctly. So maybe each party thinks they have communicated whatever they need to do or whatever they need correctly to the other party, but the other party may not have understood that correctly. So here a lot of friction or a lot of breakdown can happen. The performer then, let's say, would go on and do the task, and the performer then has to declare that the task is complete. So here again, breakdowns can happen. Maybe the performer has done what they were supposed to do, or they think they have done what they were supposed to do, but do not inform or declare the completion of that task. And the other place a breakdown can happen is even if, let's say, the performer does declare the completion, the requester also has to declare satisfaction. Maybe the performer did complete the task and inform, but the requester never conveyed their satisfactory acceptance of completion. So a lot of times the problem is there are assumptions made, and the assumptions are not declared; they are implied, and you just assume that the other person has understood what you were trying to say, never actually clarify, and then find out at the end that there were some gaps in understanding or in communication, and hence things could not quite be done in the manner as they were originally planned. So let's maybe say, as an example, you needed some report to be done, let's say by Friday evening, and you ask the colleague to send you some portion of work write up based on something they had done, which you need to add in the report that you have to prepare. And let's say the format for how they have to send you this write up was never discussed. So maybe you are preparing PowerPoint slides. Let's say that's the report that you have to prepare, and this colleague sends you. Let's take a very wildly different example. Let's say they are an engineer, they send you a LaTeX document, right? Something that has code, you need to convert that into text and then graphics and then put that in your PowerPoint slides. So just a big nightmare. And then let's say this was also not complete. So they send you some work in progress draft, completely different format that's of no use to you. And then you discuss, and maybe they interpreted that you just needed some numbers, and this file that they worked very hard to prepare has all those numbers. They thought that is what you wanted, but then you were hoping to receive a nice summary of the complete work done by them, which you could just slap onto into your report. So in this example, it's not like the work did not happen. It's not like the requirement wasn't communicated, but there were gaps, clarification. If it would have been done right in the beginning, maybe the format would have been discussed, the deadline would have been discussed, what exactly is needed could have been discussed, then it would have been more efficient. Otherwise, you end up having to do more work to make up for all of this lack of understanding and the gaps that result in the requirement not being completely met. So, if I have to summarize, then broadly, I can say that breakdowns happen due to three different reasons at three interfaces. One is ambiguous requests, where the conditions or the requirements or the scope of work, deadline, they are not clearly defined. So it's very ambiguous and left to interpretation. And then, of course, a lot of assumptions come in, and maybe there are mismatched expectations. The other one is what I call a soft commitment. So maybe you ask someone for something, they're not sure they can do it, but they'll say, okay, I will try. And maybe you interpret that try as their acceptance that they will do it, but that is not what they meant. So they just made a very soft commitment, but you interpret that as willingness or acceptance to do the thing that you asked. And the last one is closure, where either the completion is not declared or the satisfaction or confirmation acceptance of the work are not declared. So maybe some loose feedback is given that, oh, this looks good, but it would be nice if this thing were also there. Uh, Maybe in that report example, maybe you say, oh, this looks good, but would have been nice to have this as a PowerPoint. Maybe the performer hears that as feedback, but the requester actually meant that as rejection of the work that had been done and asking for that to be done again. Right. So it's important to clarify expectations as explicitly as possible. Never let anything be left to assumptions. And again, let me clarify that the point is not to blame anyone, right? I mean, in this example that I gave, it's not like the requester is at fault or the performer is at fault for that thing not getting done correctly. It's the lack of coordination and explicit communication. So this atom of work framework is not a solution or a magic uh, answer to how to collaborate effectively. It just talks about all these different things that we have to be mindful of and just be aware of the roles that we play and the expectations that we should have of each other and clarify whatever we need to clarify. So, anytime you have to work on a collaborative task with someone else, it helps to specify exactly what is needed. So, if you are the requester, you have to communicate exactly what you need, or if you are the performer, you have to clarify what exactly is the requester asking from you. Also, clarify when this thing is needed. So, again, both parties should explicitly discuss these things and have negotiations, right? It's not that a requester asks and requester is maybe in a position of power, so the performer has to comply. All of these should be negotiations, and once something is agreed upon, of course, both parties have to try their best to meet that. So, what exactly is needed, by when is it needed? What does good look like? So, when do both parties, so what do they aim for? When do they say that, okay, this thing is now done, right? Whatever you had requested, I delivered. This is what we said is needed in this form up to this level of completion, and here it is now. This ask is done. So that what does good look like? That has to be defined, and there should be alignment on what completion means. So if I have to give you a report, is raw data enough, or do I have to make the slides for you? Can I give them to you in any format, or would you like me to make them in a specific format? Will you be giving me the format, or should I be designing the format, etc. Right? So be as clear as possible on every little detail. So what it takes to collaborate effectively, I think, is communicating well, and more than being aligned in how we think. I think if we can get this coordination done properly, this whole atom of work, this loop, if it can be completed without any hiccups, without any glitches, that I think is what successful collaboration really means. So yeah, this concept has been very useful for me. Now I don't have to think about it very consciously. Even in my subconscious planning for collaborative tasks, I tend to think that way. But in the beginning, of course, I had to make a conscious effort to think if I am the requester, have I clarified my ask? Have I declared my satisfaction of the completion of the task, etc. Now I don't need to do that as consciously. So if you liked hearing about this concept and maybe you hadn't heard of it before or hadn't thought about collaborative work in this manner before, maybe you can give it a try and see if this helps you become a better team player. So let me stop here. I look forward to seeing you in my next episode. I am Siddharth Talur, and this is Thinking in Loud.